The first night was chaos, scratching, breathing, something learning the sound of my fear through the walls. I survived by locking every door. The second night began with the sound of a lock turning from inside the house.
Welcome to Horror Audiobook.
I thought survival meant holding out until morning. I thought if I stayed quiet, stayed hidden, stayed awake, I could outlast whatever was outside. But this story isn't about what hunted me in the dark. It's about what learned me, what adapted, what waited for me to feel safe. Because the first night tests your fear, and the second night uses it against you. Chapter 1. They said the house was empty. They said the house was empty. That was the first lie Elias Harper told himself as he turned off the county road and onto the narrow gravel drive. The tires crunched loudly, too loudly, the sound carrying farther than it should have in the stillness. Forest pressed in on both sides, oak, pine, and something darker beneath the canopy, a thickness that swallowed distance. The house didn't appear at first. It revealed itself slowly, boards and windows emerging as if deciding whether to be seen. "Nothing here can hurt me." He repeated the phrase as the house finally came into full view. A two-story structure, gray with age, its paint flacking in long, curling strips like dead skin. The porch sagged slightly in the middle, but the roof looked intact. Windows were dark, unbroken, unwelcoming. It was exactly what he needed, remote, cheap, forgotten. Isolation meant safety. That was the logic. No neighbors, no traffic, no one to hear you panic, and no one to cause it either. "Nothing here can hurt me." Elias cut the engine. The silence rushed in immediately, thick and complete, as if it had been waiting for the sound to stop. No insects, no birds, not even wind in the trees. The quiet felt arranged, as though the world had been muted deliberately. He sat there longer than necessary, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other gripping the key. The house loomed ahead, patient. Watching? No, that wasn't right. Houses didn't watch. They waited. He forced the thought away, stepped out of the car, and retrieved his bag from the back seat. The air smelled wrong. Not rotten, not sharp. Just old. Like a room sealed for decades and opened only moments ago. The porch boards groaned under his weight, complaining in tired, uneven tones. Elias paused, listening for an echo, a response. There was none. He unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The hinges didn't scream, they whispered. Inside, the house was cooler than expected. The air pressed gently against his skin, carrying the faint scent of dust and wood polish. Someone had cleaned once, long ago, and then never again. The furniture remained, covered in sheets yellowed with time. A couch, a chair, a table positioned too carefully in the center of the room. "Nothing here can hurt me." The words sounded smaller indoors. He stepped fully inside and closed the door behind him. The latch clicked softly, too softly. He checked it twice, then a third time before letting his hand fall away. The living room stretched out in muted grays and browns, light filtering through thin curtains that hadn't moved when the door opened. Elias frowned. No draft, no breeze, just stillness. The house felt observant. Not alive, not hostile, simply aware, like a space that noticed when something changed, when something entered. He shook his head and laughed quietly, the sound thin and nervous. Being alone did that to people. He'd read about it. Sensory deprivation. Pattern-seeking brains inventing meaning where there was none. He moved through the rooms methodically, grounding himself in facts. Kitchen, old appliances, unplugged, coated in dust. Pantry, empty except for a single cracked jar, its label long since faded. Bathroom, mirror intact, porcelain sink stained but usable. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, one with a bare mattress, the other stripped completely, floorboards exposed like ribs. Every window was locked. That should have been comforting. Instead, it felt premature, as if the house had already decided no one should leave or enter. "Nothing here can hurt me." He said it again, louder this time, testing how the words sounded in the air. They didn't echo. The sound died quickly, swallowed by the walls. As the afternoon light shifted, Elias unpacked. He chose the bedroom with the mattress, setting his bag down at the foot of the bed. The room smelled faintly of iron and cold fabric. He opened the window, expecting resistance, but it slid up easily. Still no breeze. Outside, the trees stood motionless, branches frozen mid-gesture. He scanned the tree line, half expecting to see someone standing there watching. There was nothing, just forest. Endless, dense forest. He closed the window again. The first hour passed quietly. Then the second. Elias busied himself checking the locks, testing doors, inventorying supplies. With each task completed, his confidence grew. The house was solid, the isolation complete. Nothing here can hurt me. By evening, hunger set in. He ate standing up in the kitchen, the crunch of his food echoing unpleasantly in the narrow space. Between bites, he listened. Not for anything specific, just listening. That was when he noticed the silence wasn't constant. It shifted. Not in volume, but in texture. Sometimes it felt heavy, pressing in on his ears. Other times it thinned, stretching taut as if waiting to be broken. When he moved, the house responded with soft creaks and ticks, like a body adjusting in sleep. He told himself it was normal. Old houses made noise, old places settled. As dusk bled into night, the forest outside darkened into a single mass. Elias turned on the lamps he'd brought, their weak light pooling in corners, failing to reach the edges of rooms. Shadows clung stubbornly to doorways and ceilings. He stood in the living room, looking around, and for the first time since arriving, the phrase wouldn't come. Nothing here can hurt me. He tried to say it anyway, the words stuck in his throat. Because the house wasn't empty. Not really. It was full of pauses, full of waiting spaces, full of the sense that something had been here long before Elias arrived and had simply stepped aside to let him in. As night settled completely, a soft sound drifted through the house. Not a bang, not a knock. A slow, deliberate scrape, fingernails maybe or wood against wood, testing the outside wall. Elias froze, breath shallow, heart stuttering. The first night had begun. Chapter 2. The first sound came after midnight. Midnight arrived without ceremony. No chime, no shift in the air, just a gradual understanding that the dark had finished settling and decided to stay. Elias lay on the mattress fully clothed, boots still on, eyes fixed on the ceiling where shadows gathered in slow, unmoving stains. He hadn't turned the lamp off. He didn't trust the dark yet. The light hummed softly, a thin, electrical reassurance that felt fragile in the vast quiet. Nothing here can hurt me. The phrase returned on its own, quieter now, less certain. He breathed it in and out, sinking it to the rise and fall of his chest. His heart refused to slow. Every sound, every imagined sound, felt amplified. The house ticked and sighed around him, old wood contracting, nails shifting in their sockets. Then, precisely when his thoughts began to blur at the edges, it came. A sound. Not loud, not sudden. A scrape. It came from outside the house, low and measured, like something being dragged slowly across the siding. The sound stopped, then came again. Scrape, pause, scrape. Elias held his breath. The sound wasn't random. It wasn't wind. There was no wind. It had rhythm, intention, a deliberate testing, as if whoever or whatever was making it wanted to know how much pressure the house could take before it responded. Elias slid off the mattress and crossed the room, every step careful, heel to toe. He reached the window and leaned close, peering through the glass into the darkness beyond. The porch light illuminated a small circle of empty space. The trees beyond remained still, their branches etched sharply against the night sky. Nothing. The scrape came again. This time closer. Elias flinched despite himself, his shoulder brushing the wall. The sound stopped immediately. Silence rushed in to fill the space it left. It heard me. The thought landed fully formed, unwelcome and cold. Elias stayed frozen, counting his breaths, listening. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Just as he began to convince himself it was coincidence, he shifted his weight. Scrape. The sound resumed instantly, perfectly timed to his movement. Elias backed away from the window, heart pounding hard enough to make his vision pulse. The scrape followed, sliding along the wall in parallel, keeping pace with him. It heard me. He moved again, one step toward the door. The sound moved with him. When he stopped, it stopped. When he raised his hand, it paused, then resumed, faster now, sharper. This wasn't a creature thrashing blindly. This was something conducting an experiment. Fear sharpened into clarity. Survival logic kicked in, cold and efficient. Don't move. Don't make noise. Don't give it data. Elias crouched slowly, lowering himself to the floor, muscles burning from the effort of moving so deliberately. The scrape continued for a few seconds, then halted. The silence that followed felt thicker than before, heavy enough to press against his eardrums. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time stretched, lost its shape. Finally, Elias exhaled and dared to believe the worst had passed. That was when the tapping started. Tap, tap, tap. Not scraping now, tapping. 3 taps in a row, evenly spaced, coming from the front of the house. Not the door. The wall beside it, too low to be a knuckle, too precise to be an accident. Elias swallowed hard and crawled toward the bedroom door, keeping close to the wall. The hallway beyond was dark, the living room swallowed by shadow. The tapping continued, patient, unhurried. Tap, tap, tap. With each set, the taps shifted slightly, moving along the exterior wall, mapping the house's boundaries. It's counting, Elias thought, measuring. He reached the hallway and listened. The sound carried clearly now, echoing faintly through the structure, when he leaned forward to get a better angle. Tap. The sound came from directly outside his position. Elias recoiled, heart leaping into his throat. It heard me. The tapping stopped. A new sound replaced it, softer, almost gentle. Breathing. Not heavy, not labored, just a steady inhale and exhale, close enough that Elias imagined fog blooming on the other side of the wall. He pressed a hand to his mouth to stifle the sound of his own breathing. His thoughts raced, but his body remained locked in place. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to bolt for the door, to flee into the forest. But another, deeper instinct whispered that movement was exactly what it wanted. The breathing continued for a long, unbearable moment. Then it withdrew. Footsteps retreated into the darkness outside, slow and deliberate, never fully fatting. Elias waited until his muscles trembled from the strain of holding still. When he finally dared to move, it was only to slide backward into the bedroom and close the door as silently as possible. He locked it. Then he dragged the small dresser in front of it, inch by inch, pausing whenever the wood creaked. When he was done, he collapsed onto the mattress, shaking. The house creaked in response, settling around him. Hours passed. The sounds did not return, not scraping, not tapping, not breathing. Exhaustion crept in despite the fear, dragging his thoughts toward sleep. Elias fought it, forcing his eyes to stay open, replaying the night's events again and again. The pattern was clear now. The thing outside wasn't attacking. It was learning. As dawn crept faintly into the sky, staining the edges of the darkness with gray, Elias finally allowed his eyes to close. He survived the first night. But as sleep claimed him, he missed the quietest sound of all, the soft click of a lock turning somewhere else in the house, responding to lessons already learned. Chapter 3. I barricaded the doors too late. Morning came reluctantly. A pale, colorless light seeped through the curtains, more suggestion than illumination. It did nothing to warm the air or ease the tightness in Elias Harper's chest. He woke already tense, muscles aching from a night spent half curled, half ready to run. For a long moment he didn't move. He listened. Silence. Real silence this time, or close enough to convince him he was alone again. Elias exhaled slowly and sat up. The bedroom door stood exactly as he'd left it, dresser pressed against the wood, the lock still turned. Nothing appeared disturbed. No marks on the walls. No scratches beneath the window. For a dangerous, fleeting moment, relief bloomed. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe exhaustion had sharpened his imagination. Maybe the fear had been the worst part. He stood, stretched, and immediately winced as his joints protested. The house answered with a low groan from somewhere deep in its frame. The sound lingered, as though the structure were finishing a thought. Elias didn't like that. He moved cautiously into the hallway, then into the living room. Daylight revealed dust motes suspended in the air, frozen in place. The furniture still sat beneath its sheets like patient figures waiting for instruction. Nothing had changed. That, more than anything, unsettled him. He ate quickly, barely tasting the food, his eyes drifting again and again to the windows. Outside, the forest looked ordinary now, trees swaying gently, leaves whispering to one another. Birds had returned. The world had resumed its performance of normalcy. But Elias knew better. It learned faster than I did. The phrase came to him unprompted, curling through his thoughts like smoke. He pushed it away and focused on action. Fear demanded movement, planning, defense. Barricades. He started with the front door, dragged the heavy dining table across the floor, the legs shrieking softly against the wood. He wedged chairs beneath the handle, stacking weight and friction until the door felt immovable. He repeated the process at the back entrance, sweating despite the cool air. Each locked door gave him a small, sharp rush of confidence. He checked the windows next, lowered the blinds, slid furniture in front of the larger ones, nailed loose boards across the basement entrance. His hands trembled as he worked, but the rhythm steadied him. Measure, lift, push, secure. This was logic, this was survival. By midday, the house felt smaller, tighter, compressed inward by his defenses. Elias stood in the center of the living room, hands on his hips, chest rising and falling hard. Nothing's getting in now, he thought. The house creaked softly, settling. It sounded almost amused. The afternoon dragged. Elias busied himself cleaning a single room, then stopped, the futility of it pressing down on him. Clean or dirty, open or sealed, the house didn't care. Whatever had come in the night before hadn't been stopped by neglect. As evening approached, his nerves returned in full force. He checked every barricade twice, then a third time. He tested the locks, pressing his shoulder against doors until the wood bit into muscle. Solid. Too solid. Dusk slid across the forest like a bruise, deepening slowly. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, clawing their way up the house's exterior. Elias turned on every lamp he had, filling the rooms with harsh, overlapping light. Night came anyway. He took position in the living room, back against the wall, eyes fixed on the front door. The silence returned with it, thicker than before, pressing in around the edges of his hearing. Then footsteps. Not close, not yet. They circled the house, slow and deliberate, crunching softly over gravel and leaves. Elias followed the sound with his eyes as if he could see through the walls. The footsteps paused at the front door. A gentle push. The barricade held. Elias didn't breathe. Another push, firmer this time. The chairs creaked but stayed in place. Elias felt a surge of triumph that tasted almost like laughter. It can't get in. The footsteps retreated. Relief washed through him in a dizzying wave. Then something changed. A new sound emerged not at the doors but above him. A faint thump followed by a dragging noise across the roof. Slow, curious, exploring. Elias tilted his head back, dread coiling tight in his stomach. It learned faster than I did. The sound moved from the roof to the side of the house, then to the back, then, impossibly, to the second floor. A window rattled upstairs. Elias sprang to his feet, heart hammering. He backed toward the hallway, eyes wide, mind racing through possibilities. He hadn't barricaded the upstairs windows. He hadn't thought. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then came the tapping. Tab, tab, tab. Not on glass. On wood. Inside the house. Elias stared at the hallway, breath shallow, pulse roaring in his ears. The tapping repeated, closer now, echoing softly down the corridor. Tab, tab, tab. A door handle shifted. Not forced, not shaken. Tested. Elias stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The light flickered, then steadied. The tapping stopped. From somewhere upstairs, a lock clicked. Elias understood then, fully and horribly. The barricades hadn't kept it out. They had taught it where not to go. As the sound of slow, careful footsteps began descending the stairs, Elias backed into the corner, eyes locked on the darkened hallway. He had sealed himself in, and the house had learned exactly how to use that. Chapter 5. Morning lied to me. Morning arrived quietly, like an apology it didn't mean. Light filtered through the curtains in thin, careful bands, touching the walls without warmth. Elias Harper woke on the living room floor, neck stiff, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. For several seconds he didn't move. He waited for footsteps, for breathing, for the sense of being watched to sharpen into certainty. Nothing happened. The house lay still around him, peaceful in the way abandoned places often pretended to be. Elias pushed himself upright and listened. Birds chirped outside. Wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked under its own weight. Normal sounds. Relief came fast and dangerous, loosening something in his chest that had been knotted all night. He stood slowly, joints popping, and scanned the room. The barricade at the front door remained intact. The table hadn't shifted. The chairs still braced the handle. He laughed under his breath, a short, shaky sound. It was real, he murmured to no one, but it's over. The words felt rehearsed, like lines he'd practiced for this exact moment. Morning always changed things. That was the rule. Darkness made monsters. Light exposed them as fear and shadow and imagination. Elias clung to that belief as he moved through the house, opening curtains, letting the gray daylight dilute the corners. That was when he noticed the first thing. The lamp. It stood upright beside the couch, bulb intact, cord neatly coiled at the base. Elias stopped walking. He remembered knocking it over the night before, remembered the clatter, the flash of panic as the light flickered. He remembered leaving it where it fell, not daring to move more than necessary. He stared at the lamp now, heart slowing, then speeding up again. Maybe I picked it up, he thought. Maybe I don't remember. He moved on, forcing his feet forward, cataloging the house as he went. The kitchen looked the same. The hallway too. No new marks, no scratches, no signs of forced entry. Nothing obvious. That was the worst part. In the bedroom, the dresser still blocked the door, but it sat an inch farther from the frame than Elias remembered. The gap was small enough to be meaningless, easy to dismiss. But Elias stared at it for a long time. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. The phrase surfaced gently, settling into him like a truth he didn't want to examine too closely. He dragged the dresser fully back into place, then paused, frowning. The floor beneath it was cleaner than the surrounding wood, dust disturbed in a pattern that suggested movement. Recent movement. Elias straightened slowly, skin prickling. He checked the upstairs windows. All closed, all locked. No signs of tampering. The forest beyond swayed lazily in the breeze, sunlight breaking through the leaves. Nothing out of place. Back downstairs, he moved through the living room again, slower this time, letting his eyes linger. The sheet on the couch was folded differently. Not much, just a softer drape on one corner as if someone had smoothed it. As if someone had sat there. Elias' mouth went dry. He stood very still, listening. The house answered with a low, familiar creak. It sounded content. He spent the rest of the morning in a restless loop, checking, rechecking, convincing himself he was overreacting. Each inconsistency could be explained. Each misplaced object had a reasonable excuse. And yet, the feeling followed him from room to room, a quiet pressure at the base of his skull. The sense that he was moving through a space that had already been memorized. By noon, exhaustion set in. Fear burned energy quickly, leaving behind a hollow ache. Elias sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, staring at the wood grain. He almost missed it. A faint sound, barely there. A click. Not loud, not sharp. Familiar. Elias looked up slowly, heart thudding. The sound came again, from the hallway this time. Click. A lock. Not forced, not broken. Turned. Elias stood so abruptly his chair skidded backward. He backed away from the sound, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the darkened corridor. The house remained quiet, sunlight still pouring through the windows, painting everything in harmless colors. This is what it does, he realized. This is how it survives. It let him see just enough to doubt himself, just enough to erode the line between fear and reason. If it had torn the house apart, if it had left obvious signs, he could have acted, could have fled. Instead, it tidied up after itself. He checked the hallway door, locked. He checked the bathroom, locked. The front and back doors remained sealed behind their barricades. Everything was secure. Too secure. Elias sat back down slowly, hands trembling. His appetite was gone. His thoughts looped, circling the same realization from different angles. Something had been inside the house. Not sneaking, not hiding. Moving comfortably. The afternoon passed in fragments. Elias drifted between rooms, unable to settle, unable to leave. The forest outside felt farther away now, less inviting. The house pressed inward, familiar in the way traps often were. As the sun dipped toward the trees, shadows lengthened once more. Elias stood in the living room, watching the light fade, and felt the morning's fragile relief dissolve completely. Morning had lied. Nothing had reset, nothing had ended. The night hadn't failed, it had succeeded. And as the first star appeared in the darkening sky, Elias became painfully aware of a final inconsistency. The front door lock, the one he checked 3 times that morning, was no longer turned all the way. Someone had left it ready. And night was coming back to finish what it had started. Chapter 6. The second night began early. The second night didn't wait for darkness. It began while the sky was still bruised blue, while the last scraps of daylight clung stubbornly to the treetops. Elias noticed it first as a feeling, a subtle tightening in the air, like the house drawing a slow breath. The light outside dimmed unevenly, as if something were passing in front of the sun again and again, though the sky was clear. He stood at the living room window, arms folded tight against his chest. Too early, he thought, it's too early. The first sound came before the sun dipped below the trees. A single knock. Not loud, not aggressive. Measured. It came from the side of the house this time, not the front. Elias flinched anyway, every nerve snapping awake. He turned slowly, tracking the direction, already moving before he consciously decided to. It knows where I'll go next. The phrase surfaced instantly, uninvited, as if it had been waiting for the right moment. Elias crossed the living room and pressed his ear gently to the wall. The wood felt cool, solid. Another knock followed, same spot, same force. Elias stepped back. The knock didn't repeat. Instead, a sound answered from the opposite side of the house, a soft scuff against the back door, then a faint rattle at a window upstairs. It wasn't circling anymore. It was positioning itself. Elias backed toward the center of the house, heart racing, mind scrambling to keep up. Last night it had tested barriers, doors, locks, windows. Tonight it skipped those steps entirely. Because it already knew. He grabbed a flashlight from the table and flicked it on, sweeping the beam across the room. Nothing moved. The furniture stood where he'd left it. The barricades remained intact. The sound came again, this time from the hallway. A footstep. Inside. Elias spun, light shaking in his grip. The hallway lay empty, stretching toward the stairs in a tunnel of dim gold. He listened, pulse roaring in his ears. Another step. Then another. Slow, unhurried. It knows where I'll go next. He retreated into the kitchen, instinctively choosing the space with fewer entrances. The refrigerator hummed faintly, its sound suddenly too loud, too alive. Elias winced and reached to unplug it, plunging the room into a deeper quiet. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in. Elias waited, breath shallow, counting seconds in his head. 1, 2, 3. A new sound emerged, soft laughter. Not loud enough to echo, not clear enough to understand. Just a breathy, almost affectionate sound drifting from somewhere near the stairs. Elias' stomach twisted. "No," he whispered, the word tearing free before he could stop it. The laughter stopped immediately. A pause. Then the sound of a door opening. Elias froze. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken loudly. And yet, it heard him. No worse. It expected him. The sound of movement resumed, closer now, footsteps aligning with the path Elias had already begun retreating along. He backed into the pantry and closed the door slowly, silently, lowering the latch with aching care. Darkness swallowed him whole. He stood there pressed between shelves, breathing through his nose, sweat cooling on his skin. The house creaked softly, adjusting around him. A shadow passed beneath the crack of the door. The footsteps paused. It knows where I'll go next. The pantry door didn't open. Instead, the footsteps moved on, continuing toward the kitchen table, the living room beyond. Elias sagged slightly, relief blooming despite himself. Then something scraped lightly against the pantry door from the outside. Not the handle. A fingernail. It dragged once slowly down the wood, then stopped. Elias bit down hard on his sleeve to keep from making a sound. The scraping resumed, 3 short strokes this time, like underlining a sentence. Then came the knock. 1, 2, 3. The pattern from the first night. The pantry door rattled gently, not from force, but from something leaning against it. Elias imagined a weight resting there, patient, listening to the frantic thud of his heart. Minutes passed. Or seconds. Time had lost its edges. Finally the pressure lifted, the footsteps retreated. Elias waited long after the sounds faded before daring to move. When he finally eased the door open, the kitchen stood empty, bathed in the dying light of evening. Shadows pooled thickly in the corners. The sun was almost gone. The second night had begun hours ago. Elias stumbled into the living room and sank onto the couch, head in his hands. His thoughts spiraled, each one feeding the next. The thing wasn't reacting anymore. It wasn't improvising. It was predicting. Every choice he made narrowed his options further, turning the house into a map of his fear. Doors led where it expected him to flee. Hiding places became invitations. A soft click sounded behind him. Elias twisted around. The front door lock turned slowly, deliberately, stopping just short of fully open. The barricade still held, but the message was clear. It didn't need to rush. Elias stared at the door, chest heaving, as the last light outside vanished completely. The second night wasn't hunting him. It was hurting him. And wherever it was guiding him, Elias knew one thing with absolute certainty. It knew exactly where he would go next. Chapter 7. Something inside answered it. The house began to speak back. Not in words, not at first. Elias noticed it in the pauses between sounds, the way the silence no longer felt empty but occupied, as if the walls were holding their breath, listening alongside him. He sat on the living room floor with his back against the couch, knees pulled tight to his chest, eyes fixed on the hallway. Outside, something moved. A soft footstep in the gravel, then another, slow, careful. Elias didn't turn his head. He didn't want to confirm it, didn't want to teach it where his attention was focused. He stared instead at the doorway, at the narrow strip of darkness beyond. The house creaked. Not randomly, not settling. A floorboard shifted upstairs, directly above him. Elias' breath caught. That wasn't the thing outside. He knew the difference now. The outside sounds were exploratory, deliberate. This was intimate, familiar. The sound of weight placed carefully where it belonged. The house was responding. Another floorboard creaked, closer to the stairs. Elias whispered without meaning to, "No." The outside sound stopped instantly. The inside sound didn't. A hinge sighed softly upstairs, the faintest complaint of metal against metal. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, heart hammering so hard it made him dizzy. The house was no longer neutral. The realization settled heavily, like a final piece clicking into place. He had treated the house as shelter, as a passive space to defend, but it wasn't passive. It had never been. It had been listening. A door upstairs opened a few inches, not slammed, not forced, just enough to change the air. Elias felt it immediately, a subtle pressure shift that raised goosebumps along his arms. The outside answered with a single knock. From the front porch. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and precise. Elias flinched despite himself. Inside, a stair creaked. One step down. The timing was too perfect. Elias scrambled to his feet and backed away from the hallway, pulse roaring in his ears. He glanced toward the kitchen, then the front door, then the stairs again. Every route felt anticipated, pre-approved. It wasn't coordinating. It was communicating. Another knock sounded from outside, slightly louder this time. Inside, a door clicked shut upstairs. Elias shook his head, panic rising. "You're imagining this," he whispered. "It's stress, sleep deprivation." The words felt thin as paper. The house answered him with a sound from the walls themselves, a soft, rolling thump, like something shifting within the structure. Elias pressed his palm against the wall beside him. It was warm. He recoiled, skin crawling. From the hallway, something moved again. Not footsteps this time, but the slow drag of fabric against wood. As if someone were brushing past the wall, too close, moving sideways. Elias edged into the kitchen, keeping his eyes on the doorway. He grabbed the flashlight again, thumb hovering over the switch. The outside knocked twice. Inside, the kitchen cabinet door creaked open. Elias' stomach dropped. The cabinet door moved only an inch, then stopped, hovering there. Elias stared at it, frozen, every muscle locked. Then, impossibly, it closed again. Gently. The outside knocked a third time. Elias turned in a slow circle, breath shallow, mind fracturing under the weight of it. The house wasn't just reacting, it was participating, translating, echoing. He backed toward the pantry again, then stopped himself. "It knows where I'll go next." The phrase surfaced, sharp and insistent. He changed direction abruptly, moving toward the hallway instead. His foot brushed a loose board. Inside the wall, Something shifted in response. Elias broke into a run. He sprinted down the hallway and into the bathroom, slamming the door behind him and twisting the lock. The mirror rattled. The light flickered, then steadied. He pressed his back against the door, gasping, sweat soaking his clothes. Outside the bathroom, the hallway creaked. A shadow passed beneath the door. Then another. 2 sets of movement. One heavier, one lighter. The outside knocked again, once. Inside, the bathroom sink turned on. Elias screamed. The sound tore out of him, raw and panicked, echoing violently in the small space. The water gushed from the faucet, icy and loud, splashing into the basin. Elias lunged forward and shut it off, hands shaking so badly he nearly missed the handle. Silence crashed down. Elias stood there, chest heaving, ears ringing. The knock didn't come again. Neither did the footsteps. Minutes passed, maybe longer. When Elias finally unlocked the bathroom door and cracked it open, the hallway lay empty. The shadows clung to the walls, thick and unmoving. The house felt closer now, tighter, as if it had leaned in. The outside was quiet. Too quiet. Elias stepped into the hallway, every nerve screaming. The air smelled different now, damp, metallic, like old water and rust. The house creaked softly around him. Almost contentedly. From somewhere deep within the walls, he heard it, the faintest echo of movement, like something settling into place after a long day's work. Elias understood then that he wasn't being hunted from the outside anymore. He was being hosted. As he stood there trembling, the front door lock turned on its own. And somewhere above him, a bedroom door opened wide, inviting whatever had been waiting to finally come all the way inside. Chapter 8. I heard a door unlock itself. The sound was so quiet Elias almost missed it. No snap of metal, no scrape, no resistance. Just a soft, final click. He stood in the hallway, frozen mid-step, every muscle locked in place. The house seemed to lean toward the sound with him, listening. For a moment, Elias convinced himself it had come from his own head, a phantom noise conjured by exhaustion and fear. Then the door at the end of the hallway drifted open. It moved slowly, smoothly, as if guided by a patient hand. The latch hadn't been forced. The wood didn't splinter. The hinges didn't complain. The door simply accepted the idea of being open. Elias felt something inside him collapse. That door had been locked. He remembered checking it, once in the morning, twice in the afternoon, again just before sunset. He remembered the feel of the key turning, the small resistance before the mechanism caught. He remembered believing it mattered. The door stopped halfway, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. The room inside breathed out a stale, damp air that carried the faint scent of dust and something older, something that had been waiting. I taught it how to trap me. The phrase came unbidden, sharp and merciless. Elias backed away, heart pounding, his heel bumping softly against the wall. He didn't take his eyes off the open door. He couldn't. It felt like looking away would be permission. Nothing stepped out. Nothing needed to. The hallway creaked, a slow, thoughtful sound, like a throat clearing before speech. Elias felt the house settle around him, doors and walls and ceilings aligning with quiet purpose. Every barricade he'd built suddenly felt ridiculous. Chairs braced against doors that didn't need to open, locks that no longer meant privacy, hiding places that had become markers on a map. He moved backward into the living room, breath shallow, palms slick with sweat. His gaze darted from doorway to doorway, cataloging escape routes that no longer existed. The front door remained sealed behind its barricade, but now that felt less like safety and more like containment. Outside, the forest was silent. No knocks, no footsteps. The thing that had stalked the perimeter had gone quiet, as if its work there was done. Elias swallowed hard. I taught it how to trap me. He whispered aloud this time, the words tasting bitter. The open door down the hall responded with a faint shift, widening another inch. Elias flinched. He grabbed a chair and dragged it across the floor, positioning it in front of the hallway entrance. The sound echoed too loudly, scraping through the house like a confession. He winced, waiting for a response. Instead, he heard movement upstairs. Slow, careful. Someone, something, crossed from one room to another, the weight familiar now, almost practiced. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the urge to scream. His strategies were unraveling in real time. He had believed survival was about control, locking doors, blocking paths, forcing the world into predictable shapes. But control was just information, and he had given it everything it needed. The chair he'd placed against the hallway shifted. Not pushed. Adjusted. Elias watched in horror as it slid a few inches to the side, creating a narrow passage. The movement was gentle, precise, as if guided by someone who knew exactly how much force was required. The house creaked approvingly. Elias stumbled back and nearly fell over the couch. He caught himself, lungs burning, eyes wide and glassy. He scanned the living room, searching for anything that still belonged to him. His gaze landed on the front door. The barricade looked intact, solid, familiar. He moved toward it without thinking, driven by a desperate, animal need to touch something unchanged. He pressed his hand against the wood. It was warm. Not from sunlight, not from the room. From the other side. Elias recoiled, stumbling backward. Behind him, the open door down the hall creaked wider. The upstairs footsteps paused, then resumed, beginning a slow descent. Elias backed into the center of the room, turning in a tight circle, surrounded by entrances that no longer respected boundaries. His thoughts fractured, looping endlessly around the same realization. Every lesson had been learned. Every fear catalogued. The house no longer needed him to move. A new sound emerged, soft, almost affectionate. The click of another lock. This one close. Elias turned just in time to see the bathroom door unlock itself, the handle turning slowly, deliberately, as if demonstrating how easy it was now. I taught it how to trap me. The phrase repeated, relentless, stripping away the last of his denial. The bathroom door didn't open. It didn't need to. Elias stood trembling, the house breathing around him, as footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. The second night wasn't escalating. It was concluding. And Elias understood with terrible clarity that every choice he'd made, every lock turned, every door blocked, had only narrowed the space until there was nowhere left to stand that wasn't already claimed. Chapter 9. It didn't want me dead. Elias expected pain. He expected the moment to come suddenly, a rush, a strike, the end of all this waiting. His body stayed braced for it, muscles locked, breath shallow, nerves stretched so tight they trembled. But the moment never arrived. Instead, the house waited. The footsteps that had reached the bottom of the stairs stopped just out of sight. Elias stood in the living room, surrounded by half-open doors and crooked barricades, his shadow broken apart by overlapping pools of light. Nothing touched him, nothing lunged. Minutes passed. Then more. The silence returned, deliberate and controlled. It pressed against him from every direction, forcing his thoughts inward. His heartbeat slowed, then sped up again, trapped in a sick rhythm that refused to settle. It didn't want me dead. The realization came quietly, without drama, and that somehow made it worse. If it wanted him dead, it would already be over. It had opportunity, access, control. Elias could feel it in the way the house held him, the way exits existed only as concepts now, not possibilities. Death would be simple. This wasn't simple. A chair scraped softly across the floor behind him. Elias flinched and spun around, flashlight slicing through the room. The chair moved only a few inches, then stopped, angled slightly toward the hallway, as if suggesting a direction. Elias shook his head violently. "No," he whispered, voice cracking, "I'm not." The word died in his throat. From somewhere inside the walls came a low, resonant sound, like a sigh passing through a chest that wasn't his. The house creaked, slow and deep, a sound that carried something almost like disappointment. Elias sagged against the wall, strength draining from his limbs. His mouth felt dry, his eyes burned. He hadn't slept, not really, since arriving. Fear had hollowed him out, leaving behind a raw, shaking shell. This is the point, he thought dimly. This is where it wins. The hallway light flickered once, then steadied. Elias noticed then how carefully the house managed him. It never plunged him into total darkness. Never left him in full light either. Always just enough to see what was coming, just enough to imagine what wasn't. A door upstairs slammed suddenly. Elias gasped, knees buckling, heart leaping into his throat. He waited for the rush of footsteps, the charge down the stairs. Nothing followed. The silence stretched. Then faintly he heard something else, movement outside again. Not close, not threatening, just enough to remind him the perimeter still existed. The house hadn't abandoned its partner. It was coordinating. Elias dragged himself to the couch and collapsed onto it, chest heaving. His body ached everywhere, a deep, bruised exhaustion that felt older than his fear. His thoughts slowed, edges blurring. That's when he noticed the smell. Not rot, not decay. Warmth. Like breath on skin, like a room after someone has just left it. The house felt occupied. Elias stared at the ceiling, tears burning behind his eyes. He laughed weakly, the sound breaking apart as it left him. "You don't need to do this," he said aloud, not caring anymore if it heard. "You've already won." The words echoed faintly, swallowed by the walls. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the bathroom door opened. Just a crack. No sound, no force. Elias watched it from the couch, unable to move. The darkness beyond the door seemed thicker than the shadows elsewhere, dense and patient. A shape shifted inside it. Not stepping out, not advancing. Waiting. Elias closed his eyes. This was the cruelest part, the restraint. The way it withheld the ending, drawing the night out until fear turned inward, until the mind began to fracture under the strain. It wasn't trying to kill him. It was trying to teach him something. It wanted me changed. The realization settled heavily over him, sinking into his bones. Whatever this thing was, whatever the house had become, it didn't want a body. It wanted a version. Elias felt himself slipping, his thoughts turning sluggish, his resistance thinning. He imagined what it would be like to stop fighting, to stop questioning, to let the house decide where he stood, where he went when he slept. The idea terrified him. The idea tempted him. From the hallway, a soft sound drifted toward him, barely audible. Breathing. Close now, inside the room. Elias didn't open his eyes. He couldn't. The breathing stayed with him, steady and calm, until his own breath began to match it without him realizing. In, out, in, out. The house creaked softly, a sound that felt almost like approval. Somewhere deep inside himself, Elias felt a door unlock. Not in the house. In him. When he finally opened his eyes, the room looked the same. No monster loomed over him. No hands reached out. The bathroom door remained cracked, the darkness beyond unmoving. But Elias felt different. Quieter. Smaller. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It no longer screamed, it waited. And as the night stretched on, unbroken and endless, Elias understood the final truth. The second night wasn't about survival. It was about surrender. And whatever he would be by morning, it would not be the person who arrived believing emptiness meant safety. Chapter 10. The house remembers me now. Morning arrived the way it always had. Quietly, carefully, as if afraid of waking something. Elias stood in the living room and watched the light seep in through the thin curtains, turning dust into drifting constellations. The house looked ordinary again, walls pale, furniture still, shadows retreating into corners where they belonged. The night had withdrawn without ceremony, leaving no obvious scars behind. No broken doors. No overturned furniture. No blood. For a moment, Elias wondered if he dreamed it all. The thought lasted less than a second. He felt the house watching him, not with attention but with memory, like a place that recognized his weight on the floorboards, like a space that knew how he breathed. He moved slowly, joints stiff, exhaustion clinging to him like damp clothes. Every step felt rehearsed, already anticipated. He half expected a sound to answer him, a creak, a click, a whisper in the walls. Nothing did. That frightened him more than anything else. Elias approached the front door. The barricade was still there, table and chairs wedged tight, exactly as he'd left them. He dismantled it piece by piece, each scrape of wood against wood echoing too loudly in the morning quiet. When the door was finally clear, he reached for the handle and hesitated. The lock was already unlocked. He stared at it for a long time before opening the door. Outside, the forest breathed gently. Birds hopped between branches. Sunlight filtered through leaves in warm, forgiving patterns. The world beyond the threshold felt impossibly wide after the compression of the house. Elias stepped out onto the porch. Nothing followed him. He descended the steps, half expecting the door to slam shut behind him, to hear the lock turn one final time. But the house remained open, patient, watching him leave without protest. That was the problem. The house didn't resist. It didn't need to. Elias reached his car and opened the door with shaking hands. The interior smelled faintly of oil and old coffee, mundane, grounding scents that almost made him cry. He sat behind the wheel and rested his forehead against it, breathing hard. "You're out," he told himself. "It's over." The engine started on the first try. As he drove away, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. The house went with him. Hours passed. The road unwound beneath the tires. Civilization returned in fragments, mailboxes, gas stations, a diner with a flickering sign. Elias stopped once, standing under harsh fluorescent lights, staring at his reflection in a bathroom mirror. He looked thinner, paler, older. When he turned the faucet on, he flinched. The water ran normally. Still, he watched it longer than necessary before turning it off. He slept that night in a motel room with the television on and the lights blazing. He pushed the dresser in front of the door. He checked the lock 3 times. He lay awake until dawn, heart pounding at every unfamiliar sound. Nothing happened. And yet, when morning came, he noticed the chair by the window had been turned slightly, just enough to face the bed. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. Days passed, then weeks. Elias told no one about the house. He avoided rural roads, avoided silence, avoided sleep when he could. But the lessons followed him everywhere, etched into reflex and habit. He found himself mapping rooms unconsciously, nodding exits, listening for patterns, feeling the weight of spaces as if they could shift at any moment. Sometimes, late at night, he heard the softest sound, wood settling, a distant click, and felt his breath fall into a rhythm that wasn't entirely his own. The house had taught him well. And somewhere far from Elias now, the house stood empty again. The table was still there, the couch still draped in its yellowed sheet. The locks rested comfortably in their frames, neither broken nor unused. Dust settled slowly, obediently, over every surface. The house waited. It remembered the shape of fear, the sound of breath in the dark, the way a human learned to listen. It would not need to learn again. When another car eventually crunched down the gravel drive, when another voice whispered, "Nothing here can hurt me," the house would be ready. Because houses like that do not forget. And neither do the ones who survive them. Elias would carry it for the rest of his life, a quiet weight beneath every thought, every choice, every locked door. He survived the first night. The second night survived him.
Closing chapter.
Survival isn't about strength. It's about what you teach your fear while you're trying to escape it. I locked doors, I memorized sounds, I adapted. And everything watching me adapted faster. The first night showed me what I was afraid of. The second night showed me who I was. So if you ever find yourself believing silence means safety, if you think being alone means being unseen, remember this story. Because the worst horrors don't break in. They wait. They learn. And they remember you. If this story stayed with you, don't leave quietly. Like the video, subscribe. And tell me, would you survive the second night?